So we'll start by setting our motivation. So we think about our purpose in reflecting on the teachings of the Buddha as condensed and explained in the Lamrim, the stages of the path to awakening. So we think about this body of wisdom, its validity, its power to transform an ordinary mind, our mind, into a fully awakened being's mind, simply by applying ourselves, recognizing that the only difference between oneself and a fully awakened being is that the fully awakened being has done that work already, whereas we are more or less just beginning. And we think that the purpose of becoming like that is to be of limitless benefit to sentient beings. So we develop these minds of confidence, a mind of faith, a mind of refuge, a mind of bodhicitta. And with that motivation, we move back to the material. So we covered, we've had a couple of classes in this section, the section on the suffering of the lower realms. And we've gone up through the hell realm, Narok realm, the state of being unfree. And the next section is the lower realm of what's called the hungry ghost realm. So that starts on day 126. Where is... Oh no. Okay, sorry, I lost. Okay, so day 126. The quotation, nobody wants to be a hungry ghost, but we are moving toward that existence every day. So, super uplifting quote to begin today's discussion. So, we talked about, the specific sufferings of the hell realm, and now the specific sufferings of the hungry ghost realm is what is next. And basically, what they say is that this is a realm that seems to me that generally meditators don't say that the hell realms are perceptible in the human realm, But they do talk about, like as is talked about in day 126, that it seems like that the realm, the hungry ghost, the sort of energetic realm that we're talking about, in a way almost overlaps the human realm, in that sometimes people have the karma to see um, the beings experiencing the hungry ghost realm just kind of in the, so whatever distinguishes the two realms energetically, some people have the karma um, to actually observe hungry ghosts kind of in the environment. Um, so the overwhelming, we talked about the hell realms are generally comprised of the hot hells and the cold hells. And then sometime you talk about the neighboring hells and the occasional hells. Um, but the hungry ghost realm, the predominant experience is one of overwhelming hunger and thirst, and being in an environment where the body that one appropriates, the physical aggregates, and the external environment are kind of designed to work against that overwhelming drive that you experience. So they talk about the body of a hungry ghost having a very large, distended abdomen, and then a very, very incredibly narrow neck and extremely pinched kind of mouth and oral opening. So even the physical form that you appropriate really is working against being able to intake hunger, being able to intake food and drink, just because of this incredibly narrow um, neck and oral opening, but then having this like cavernous uh, stomach that always is wanting and needing sustenance. And they say that the energy that drives that kind of rebirth is a mind of covetousness, a mind of miserliness. So the energy of greed, the energy of stinginess, um, that kind of mental energy, if that is what is predominating a person's mind, either because they practice that over and over again in their lifetime as a human, or for whatever reason it comes to predominate the last moments of their lifetime, then that kind of energy can give rise to that kind of rebirth. It can trigger that kind of karmic seed, and give rise to that kind of rebirth. So one of the reasons why generosity, is one of the things that is emphasized so much, and generosity being not necessarily actually having nothing, because a person has given everything away. That may not be the most skillful way of practicing generosity. We may safeguard our possessions and our wealth and so on, so that over time we can give what, when, and where it's most helpful. And then, of course, there are kinds of generosity that have nothing to do with the giving away of wealth or property. The giving of one's time, the giving of one's, knowledge, one's effort, and so on behalf of sentient beings. Um, so those are also forms of generosity, but it's essentially a non-attachment. And even in dedication practice, when we um, mentally give away the fruit of our practice, that's also a form of practicing in generosity, training the mind in generosity. So we're trying to actively counter that kind of tight, clinging mind, that miserly, stingy perspective So it isn't that we must become someone who has nothing. We're trying to become someone who doesn't really care what they may or may not possess, who doesn't feel like they need to have, more than is necessary. Um, but a person, may already have, a nice car, a nice house. Doesn't mean that they sell that and they move. And it doesn't, certainly doesn't mean that we go quicker than is comfortable, that if we just painfully separate, because that might be, again, that might be unskillful. We might then regret uh, a particular act of generosity, and then it really isn't an act of generosity if we feel badly about it, if we are then just constantly thinking, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, I wish I still had this or that. So there's a really skillful way of working with that. But the idea is, we, just like with all of these trainings, we want to spend the time that we have in this life to cultivate those states of mind, so that that is operative during the death process, so that when things, because we come to a point during the death time when we are actively being separated from whatever it is that we've accumulated, and also our friends and so on. And can we experience that with a stable mind? Can we experience that without strong craving and grasping arising in the mind? Thinking, oh, I'll never be able to drive this car again. Oh, all of the comforts that I'm experiencing, I don't know what will happen next, but I will be separated from those. Um, can we become someone who's able to experience that separation equitably, with an open, even tempered perspective, rather than allowing those attachments to fuel um, kind of a grasping, tight, needy, stingy, miserly perspective that might trigger a negative karma um, during the death time, which we don't want. Uh, any questions so far?
Venerable, what is the last part of that beginning statement? Is that pertaining to those who are not Dharma practitioners, but we are moving toward that existence every day, or what?
It's from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and I think he's, in general, I think he's just talking, because we've talked before, broadly speaking, about the lower realms. The reason that that they're populated by so many beings in general is that it's kind of the path of least resistance for the mind, the self-centered mind, the self-cherishing mind, the mind that grasps at what, just wanting more, wanting better, wanting that applies to everyone, in a way. And so um, I think he's not saying that it's unavoidable. Of course, that's the whole point, is that none of these are unavoidable. Um, but I think he's pointing out, I mean, of course, you'd have to ask him to be sure. He doesn't, he doesn't say, he doesn't, the quote, the pages don't go on to specifically qualify what is meant by we, but I think in general it's just that it's easier to have a mentality of going through life with thinking, well, if I don't accumulate, nobody's going to do it for me. If I don't, if I don't, well, what happens if there's a downturn? I need to, and of course, that's a balance. No one's saying that we can only ever have $10 in the bank account and, we have to just be meager. Of course, no one's saying that. We should be reasonable and make sure that we can get through things, and but we should also be training the mind in generosity, day by day, with our water bowls, with our incense offerings, our light offerings, our dedication practice, with supporting things that we think are important, and and budgeting for it, and making sure that it's that it's not, that we're not being irresponsible. um, so I think he kind of just means it's easier in general for anyone. It's going to be easier to create the karmic causes and conditions for the lower realms than it is for the upper realms. So it's a little bit interesting. I don't know. I know that we kind of skipped over the more detailed descriptions of the hell realms, but it's kind of interesting. When we talked a little bit about that already, but I kind of found it interesting because they actually describe the environment. It's he says the place where hungry ghosts live is simply unimaginable. There's no grass, no trees, no water. It's completely barren and desolate. Um, he says Pabanka Rinpoche describes it as being like a red hot copper pot burnt by the sun. There are frequent sandstorms in which hot, sharp sand cuts the pretas. Since preta is another, it's just I guess I don't know if it's a Tibetan word or a Sanskrit word, but it's the word that's used to refer to, that's being translated into English as hungry ghost. Uh, Cuts the preta's sensitive skin like heavy hailstones. In winter, the sun is unbearably cold, and in summer, the moon is unbearably hot. Um, in winter, the sun is unbearably cold, and in summer, the moon is unbearably hot. Uh, so that's not a typo, that's just a different realm. Um, uh, He says, whereas we live in countries that have grass and rivers where the climate is variable and conducive to life, the hungry ghosts must live in a place that is completely hostile. There's nothing there that can sustain life, and yet they are unable to die. The ground is scorched by the sun and too hot to the touch, and yet the hungry ghosts have to live their whole life in such a place. With their huge bellies and tiny necks, hungry ghosts are unable to eat or drink, and thus are constantly plagued by hunger and thirst. Unable to die, but also unable to do anything but suffer in these terrible ways. They must endure these suffering for tens of thousands of years. So he's saying that generally the average lifespan would be what, for on human scale would be tens of thousands of Earth years, which is much better than the hell realms, which those are measured in eons, which billions and trillions of years. So in terms of that, much better, but still tens of thousands of years.
Venerable, just a question about, I guess, any of the beings in any of these lower realms, when we practice and are radiating out the different energies of the different practices, is some of that used as an intercession for these beings? Can it help them move forward and not spend that much time or never ever die? Or is that part of doing?
So I think it depends on a variety of factors. Certainly, enlightened beings are able to emanate into these different realms. And so practices that we might do, like medicine Buddha practice, where we're requesting the blessings of enlightened beings who've made various prayers and so on, then there can certainly be a benefit in that sense. With respect to the hungry ghost realm, there's a practice called Sur offerings, SUR offerings, and in FPMT's in the foundation store, there's a practice booklet that you can get if you would like to learn Sur offering practice. It does require the use of fire. You do have to put together, it's a smoke offering. So you do have to burn. So you need to have a chimney, or you need to have a safe outdoor kind of fire pot or something that you can legally, I don't want anyone, sometimes you're in an area where that's prohibited. If it's high fire warnings or something, you can't do it. But so you need something like that, and that is along with the meditations and the mantras, and that is said to that they're able to get some benefit from that. They're able to get some benefit from that. So there are practices that we can do, and then of course with animals, you can do animal liberation, which is that's again in the FPMT Foundation store. There's also a booklet for animal liberation. We can play mantras for animals. We can do, again, the animal liberation practice. And with all of these, to some degree, my understanding is that there is a role that of like what the practitioner is bringing to the practice. So the level of realization of the practitioner is also, plays a role. But still, even if the only benefit is to our own mind, in the sense that we become someone who is trying, that's an incredible benefit, because that will speed our own process toward becoming fully enlightened. It will speed the amount of time between now and when we become someone who is able to not only engage in the practice, but have it actually be more beneficial. And then, of course, our achieving of enlightenment, which is when we become perfectly beneficial to sentient beings. But then, of course, like with other things, when we do like loving kindness meditation and things like that, and we visualize, when they say to visualize countless sentient beings, like filling all of space, the understanding is that you are visualizing all of the different kinds of sentient beings, but you tend to visualize them in human form. And the understanding with that is that it's for the sake of auspiciousness, that you're visualizing them, even though you're kind of understanding that they're not, that you're not only visualizing all of the humans. It isn't that you're engaging in a practice where your view is, I'm populating my vision, my imagination with a countless number of sentient beings who only qualify as being human. Your view is that they are all sentient beings that are comprised of all of the different realms, and but you're not visual. It isn't that you're visualizing some suffering in the hell realm, some suffering. Sometimes you'll do that if it's Tonglen practice, and that's different. If you're doing Tonglen practice and you're visualizing the hell realms and so on, that's different. But if you're doing loving kindness, or you're doing Shakyamuni Buddha or Avalokiteshvara, um, different things where part of the practice is to conceptualize all sentient beings, then your own understanding is meant to be that that field of sentient beings is drawn from all of the different realms. Um, and in terms of whether that kind of practice is of any direct benefit, again, I think to the extent to which we invoke enlightened mind and enlightened activity, then there's benefit in that sense. Where we visualize the light rays and the nectars and so on coming from Shakyamuni Buddha, coming from Chenrezig, coming from Tara, etc. I think that there is benefit in that sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so then I think that kind of covers what experiences are like and the karmic causes, and yeah, I think that covers things for that realm. So then in one way, the lightest of the three lower realms is the animal realm, which is just like it is. I assume that the diversity of the animal realm on Earth isn't the entirety, that just like there's humans that are probably different than us, I'm sure on other planets there are animals that are different, but there's a representative, we can probably, I would say, stick to thinking, because there's an incredible diversity of animals on Earth. I think that's good enough to use as a representative of what that is like. So Lama Yeshe in day 129 uses the animal realm rebirth to kind of talk about the idea that mind doesn't always progress linearly in a useful direction, which is, but is applicable to all of the lower realms. The idea that we find it hard to accept that the mind that we have now can have such a different kind of experience when it appropriates different aggregates. But he says that the mind that we have now is not an intrinsically or inherently human mind. The mind that we have now is having a human experience because that mind has appropriated human aggregates. And if that mind were to appropriate animal aggregates or hell being aggregates or hungry ghost aggregates, then it would be having an experience of that realm. So there's nothing from the side of mind itself that is uniquely or unavoidably human. It's just that that is the experience that mind is presently having. And at the time of death, this mind and this body do separate, and mind will appropriate new aggregates, and they could be human, and they could not. They may be they may be something else. Um, He says right action and wrong action are determined by right thought and wrong thought. Right wisdom leads to right actions, wrong conceptions lead to wrong actions. If we put the energy of the human body, speech, and mind in the right direction, it's incredibly powerful. The problem is, he says, that our life has no direction, and that's why our energy is fragmented. Um, so I think he's kind of saying if we choose to, which is the kind of the whole point of the contemplations on the low scope, to become someone who has chosen a direction, who has chosen to think of the time remaining in this life as only being directed toward creating the causes and the conditions, at least, to close the door to the lower realm. That's kind of our mission on the low scope, is at least we want to become someone whose purpose in life is to close the door to the lower realm, which we'll learn more about, when in the next chapters on karma and refuge. Um, but we, in order to really be motivated to do what's necessary to close the door on the lower realms, we have to become acquainted with why we would want to do that, which means understanding intimately the disadvantages of the lower realms, which isn't what we're doing now before we move on to investigating karma, investigating refuge. We like, why do we care? What's the point of wanting to do that? Well, the point of wanting to do that is to not appropriate those aggregates, to avoid having one's mind become a mind having that experience. But the mind itself certainly can go in that direction if that is the karma that ripens. So with respect, so we said that the primary suffering of the Preta realm is experience of incredible hunger and incredible thirst, and coupled with an environment and a body that can't do anything about hunger and thirst. The predominant suffering of the animal realm is the profound ignorance that is ruled by that. He says, due to their ignorance, animals are trapped in fear or aggression, uh, in hunger, cold, and heat, and all those other torments that make their lives miserable. No animal is free from the fear of being killed. This includes the greatest animal and the tiniest. Uh, It says, think of life in the oceans, where each of the billions and billions of fish is only concerned with staying alive, with not being eaten by other fish. Or life in the desert, where snakes must constantly hunt mice to survive, where hawks and eagles must eat snakes to survive. Even in the city, the round of killing and being killed is continuous. He says the lives of animals are incredibly cruel and full of suffering. We need to see this to really develop strong compassion for them. We need to realize how we have been such an animal countless times, and we have the karma to be like that in the future. If we become an animal, we will be unable to help ourselves and others. This is why meditating on the suffering of the animal realm is incredibly important. So yeah, I mean, because of course, for us, what we tend to think of when we think of the animal realm, which we've touched on, are kind of like the pets, which have karmically speaking kind of won the lottery in the animal realm, having, incredible, the bed that my dog slept on, cost $100, and he kept, I mean, I had it for 10 years, 12 years. So, it wasn't like, and I was just an ordinary, person wanting to, but there are humans who don't get to sleep on a bed. That there are billions of humans who will go their entire lives never sleeping on a bed that cost 100 US dollars. Um, you know um so, and he was very rarely cold, and very rarely, sometimes, he had to go out and pee in the cold, and for a few minutes here or there. But um but that's kind of what we think of when we think of the animal realm, is dogs and cats. But really, if you think about the ecosystems the of the oceans, like Lama Zopa says, the rainforests, you know, all of these, it's really just this cycle of predation and aggression and fear and starvation, um, and incredible suffering, that's happening, this ongoing cycle of fear and aggression, um, and that's, and those instincts, of course, are even in the dogs and the cats. They bark, they hunt, um, and because those instincts are still present with them. And then the killing, they have, the carnivores, they have no choice but to kill. And so then the instincts to kill get ingrained, and then those karmic seeds, are part of their mind. And um, so we have to really think about, to go beyond those examples that we're most familiar with, and think of the real animal realm suffering that's out there. Um, he says, when we see a cow or a sheep crowded together with its brothers and sisters in a truck on its way to a slaughterhouse, we should think, that could be me. We've accumulated the karma to be in that position, to be led to the slaughter room and smashed over the head with a hammer, to have our flesh cut away from our carcass and sent to a butcher's shop. When we see meat hanging in a window shop, or even wrapped neatly in plastic in the supermarket, we should think that this could well be our own flesh. Imagine being an animal like a donkey or horse, having to carry heavy loads every day. Animals plow fields and pull heavy loads, like the elephants hauling logs or the horses pulling mountains of produce in Asia, where they grind grain blindfolded and turning a wheel hour after hour, day after day, until they die of exhaustion. No thought is given to their well-being, let alone their comfort, and when they are used up, they are thrown away like a rundown battery. Any thoughts or questions? So then we start to move in a little bit more hopeful direction, which is a good way to end. Because he says in day 132, Lama Yeshe says, the main thing to remember is that negativities are transitory, conventional, interdependent phenomena. He says at present, our minds are clouded by false views and wrong conceptions, and therefore are temporarily obscured. We have the ability to see things clearly and accurately, but instead we are groping in the darkness of attachment, clinging to the hallucinatory world of our senses. However, we should not think that we're caught in negativity permanently. There is not a single being who is suffering permanently, nor is there a single negativity that is permanent. Only as long as our mind is polluted with defilements, with wrong conceptions about reality, shall we suffer. He says there's no human problem that cannot be solved. The idea of permanent negativity and suffering only causes an agitated, guilty feeling, which in turn produces neuroses and other forms of mental illness. A person laboring under such a misconception reaches a hopeless state in which ignorance and delusion become overwhelming. They have deprived life of meaning and have nothing to fall back on but despair. However, as we develop deeper and deeper understanding, we receive more powerful realizations and thereby become purer inside. Yep, Aaron.
Would Nagas be considered part of this realm too?
I think, I think I'm not. I don't know there's a technical correct answer to that question. There's only one correct answer to that question, and I don't know what it is. And so I don't want to say. I don't know if they're considered a special case of something, or if they're, I don't, or it could be that they're considered a part of the animal realm because they have intelligence that you don't find in the animal realm. So they might be a special case of some other realm, like a special, like a. But I don't know the precise technical answer to that question.
I just looked it up. They're in the nether realm, which is half God and half animal. That's what the internet said.
Okay, so then in day 133, Lama Zopa says, the one thing that separates us from the lower realms is the practice of Dharma. He says the cause for a perfect human rebirth in the future is ethics and generosity. And when we know that and actively work toward such a rebirth, then the lower realms cease to be our next destination, and death ceases to be a thing of horror. In short, we need to practice Dharma and do nothing else but practice Dharma. Effectively, this means, he says, never harming others again, and if possible, helping them. On top of this, we must do whatever we can to destroy the negative imprints on our mind stream, which can ripen at any moment when the conditions come together. These are the three things we must do. In fact, these three things are a summary of the whole Buddhist path. It says the best way to help others and never harm them is to take the various levels of vows that are available to us, thereby not only abstaining from non-virtue, but creating virtue. The one solution to all problems, including how to avoid the lower realms, is the good heart. Everything follows from a good heart: the happiness of this life, the happiness of future lives, and liberation from samsara and enlightenment. From a good heart comes the ability to help all other sentient beings free themselves from all suffering and eventually attain enlightenment. With a good heart and with a good heart and with all this ahead of us, of course, we need to have no fear of death and the lower realms. So, yeah, that's the, with purification practice, with becoming more and more familiar with the antidotes to, with engaging in morality, stainless morality, making aspirations, practicing training the mind in bodhicitta, training in refuge, understanding karma, protecting the mind, protecting the three doors, through understanding what kinds of karma, are beneficial, what kinds of karma are harmful. Those are all of the methods that we have, incredible, that we actually can learn, what methods, what to do, what to adopt and what to discard, so that this just becomes, a training, just like when we train to drive, we watch those videos about, the injuries and so on that can happen, but we don't need to become someone who sustains those injuries, because we can actually learn what is safe driving, what it isn't that everyone who drives a car will be subject. But if you drive recklessly, if you drive under the influence, if you engage in the wrong behaviors, then you're quite likely to end up like that. And that's kind of what Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe are saying is, yes, there are causes and conditions, and if we indulge in them, then they will have a particular result. But there are other causes and other conditions, and if we cultivate those, they will have the right result. They will bring the result that we're seeking, and we can rely on that, to just make this kind of an academic exercise, and never actually have to experience it ever again. We have experienced it beginninglessly, but we have the power to never again experience, the suffering of the lower realms by doing all of the right things, engaging in all of the appropriate actions, and purifying existing negative karma, creating new positive negative karma. I'm sorry, creating new positive karma, and avoiding new negative karma. Doing those three things, is what we need to do. And if we really devote ourselves to that, then the concerns of the lower realms will only serve, just like we have to constantly keep in mind why we ought not drink and drive, why we ought not drive when there's black ice on high mountain roads, and we have to constantly recollect those things so that we don't forget, so that we don't do things that are unskillful. And so we constantly recollect the suffering of the lower realms, but its only purpose is so that we put effort into purifying negative karma, creating new virtuous karma, and avoiding creating new negative karma. As long as those beneficial, positive, constructive pathways of action are what we're energizing, then um, it isn't to say that we are powerless to avoid those sufferings. We will definitely avoid those sufferings as long as we use concern about those sufferings to energize our practice and keep, moving in the right direction. Any thoughts or questions? So we've actually covered the section on the sufferings of the lower realms with that. Anything with respect to that topic that is helpful? Mm-hmm.
So many places, especially in Shantideva's guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, even one single moment of anger can destroy or take down all this built up merit or positive stuff. So without getting too personal, do you have any practices when an anger may arise? What, do you just breathe, or do you bite your tongue, or do you think of a certain thing? I mean, just a simple practice to make that 2-second spaciousness before the attachment of grabbing onto the story. Thank you.
So, I mean, with respect to the sort of karmic consequences of all of that, I mean, the main thing that they're talking about there is in relation to, isn't just sort of ordinary, it isn't just ordinary anger that we're experiencing. Of course, like that's problematic, no one's suggesting, but really that kind of thing is really directed at the most powerful karmic objects like one's guru. And here again, we also have to recollect the more technical definition of anger that's also being used, which is kind of the wish to cause harm. Um, so, and so if one, in relation to one's own guru, really strongly develops the wish to cause harm, that's super negative. Like that's something that's particularly, but it isn't to say that, just getting angry at yeah, Aaron.
Why exactly does it produce more negative karma? Why is it so?
Yeah, it's because one's guru represents enlightenment for that person. And so if you haven't taken a guru, if you don't have a guru, and then of course, you don't have to worry about that. But this is talking about like you've already settled on a guru, you've already created a student-teacher relationship with that person. And so at one time that person represented enlightenment to you, for you, and they were the person that you had said, this is the person that's going to lead me to my enlightenment. So you've created a very powerful karmic connection by associating with someone in that way. And then if you want to kill that person, then that's super negative. So don't do that. You know, yeah. So, I mean, of course, all forms of wanting to cause harm are problematic. And so, there's different antidotes that are given, and different. Ultimately, we want to try to catch the arising of any of these negative mental states, as quickly as possible. And so, really, it depends. I would say the main thing is is thinking about it like that, thinking about trying to catch the arising of the mental state as quickly as possible. Because in a way, that instruction is similar to like meditation instruction of wanting to catch the arising of distraction as quickly as possible. When you give yourself that instruction in meditation, you really don't have to do anything else other than take that seriously. And then the more you meditate, you will find that you move back to the object faster and faster, just because you're meditating and you've given yourself that instruction. You're not doing anything other than taking that instruction seriously, and then looking for the arising of the distraction, noticing the arising of the distraction, and moving the mind back to the intended object. So when we look for the arising of the afflictions and we try to move the mind back, just like with distraction, we'll find that we're not very good at it for a long time. And it isn't until we've had the negative exchange and that person is gone, and we've kind of, our breathing has slowed down and our heart rate is, and then we regret, that happened. And then we may not be able to do anything until maybe that night when we have purification practice and we recollect that, so maybe we make a note to ourselves, we keep maybe a little book or something, or on our phone we make a little note like, okay, tonight I'll include this in my purification practice. And then by following up on that intention, we're reinforcing that we're taking it seriously. We're actually going to purify it that night. And then what we'll find is that we get faster and faster at noticing that the mind has become agitated, the mind is moved into an affliction. So the antidote really depends on how quickly we catch it. And in a way, it kind of depends on what works for us, what we like. If we can, recollect their kindness, then that helps, to thinking about their kindness from future. And our ability to do that depends upon how many meditations we've done recollecting the kindness of sentient beings. How top of mind is the kindness of sentient beings, which is interdependent in how much time and effort we've spent cultivating that realization. How much time and effort have we spent cultivating, thinking about the disadvantages of anger, cultivating the advantages of patience, thinking about, not, even if we can't do anything other than be like a piece of wood, like Shantideva says, even if that's the only antidote, just not reacting at all, being non-reactive in the moment and waiting for that arising of that energy to just pass. So it's really, there's a lot of interdependent parts, and all of them depend on how much time and energy and effort we're putting into all of those things. Okay, but we're out of time. It is 6:30, so we'll get to move on to refuge on Monday. We'll get to begin the section on refuge. All right. So let's recollect. We'll dedicate now. Again, thinking of that as part of our training in generosity, countering the energy of miserliness. So we recollect our altruistic motivation and think that by engaging in the class, listening, participating, contemplating, we've actualized our positive motivation, created positive energy in the mind, and we offer freely the fruit of that practice for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. So now just visualize all of the vast, incredibly beneficial ways in which you are offering that energy on behalf of all sentient beings. Thinking, may all of my virtues, all of my merits ripen for the benefit of others. All right. Well, I will see everyone on Monday.